how many of you have heard of Women's History Month? You know what? I didn't hear of it until a few weeks ago. I didn't know that. So, today we're going to talk a little bit about Women's History Month. And what month is it always in?
March.
March. So are we in Women's History Month right now?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so how Women's History Month got started. On March 8, 1857, women in New York City factories staged a protest over poor working conditions. You remember reading that in y'all's scholastic thing? You know, reading the letter of? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
They had poor working conditions, didn't they?
They had no safety precautions.
No safety precautions, that's right. Well, good job. So International Women's Day was started March 19, 1911 by Clara Zetkin of Germany. And it was inspired by the American working women that were working in all these poor conditions. And they also was about the American working women that helped with the efforts to end World War I. When all the men went to fight World War I, all the women had to take over the men's jobs. So this was kind of in honor of them doing that. But then people started losing interest in it again. They were just like, it kind of just went away for a little bit. So for the next few years, many people weren't interested in it. Then in the 1960s, International Women's Day started to spark interest of women again. Women started wondering why they weren't included in the history books. Do you notice many women included in the history books? Not many. The majority of them are men, right?
On History Channel, you can sometimes see.
Yeah, sometimes on the History Channel they would lead stuff. Then, in the 1970s, female historians began to look at all the contributions of women in history. They started looking at the different times, like the 1700s, what did women do, 1800s, and so on. In 1978, a California school district started a Women's History Week to promote students studying. They wanted the students to study women, to see what women had done. And to see that not only did the men do things, but that the women did things. That's right. And it was in the week including March 8th. So it would probably, with March 8th being on a weekend, it could have either been like this week or it could have been next week. Right? So it's about this time, in 1978.
That's interesting.
That is interesting. In 1981, Congress passed a resolution or a law making the week of March 8th the week to celebrate National Women's History Week in the United States. So it started out as a day, now it's a week. So it would be like this week, how it's, we have Read Across America Day on the day. So this is Read Across America Week. They had a whole week for National Women's History, just to study it. Okay?
Cool.
It would. But in 1987, a group of women wanted Congress to expand, to do more with the celebration. They wanted to make it bigger. Okay? So this made Congress declare the entire month of March National Women's History Month. Why do you think they picked March?
Because that's when they protested. Dr. Seuss's birthday, probably.
Well, Dr. Seuss wasn't a woman. Dr. Seuss was a man. Think about it. When was the day? Do y'all remember what day I said? March 8th. Well, and it was the week of March 8th. So why do you think they made March the month?
Because that's when it started.
Because it all started in March. So why not keep it in March, right? So people would remember it better. So in 1996, the National Women's History Museum was founded. Okay? It is a non-profit organization that's dedicated on preserving or saving, keeping it the same as it is, and celebrating the various historic contributions of women. And the organization's actually working with Congress to get a permanent museum site in Washington, D.C. So they don't have a permanent site yet. They're trying to get one. Now, I was researching last night and came across some of these that I wanted to share with y'all. And this is actually leading up to the assignment you're going to do for me for this, okay? So, some women's history milestones. So, in 1851, Sojourner Truth delivered her famous Ain't I a Woman speech at the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio. She was a former slave that spent 40 years of her life preaching a message of equality for all people. She wanted all people to be treated the same. Men, women, children, black, white, Asian, everybody.
Like Martin Luther King?
Kind of like Martin Luther King, but this was way before Martin Luther King's time, wasn't it? You think he maybe used her as an example? Maybe learned from her? Maybe. Then in 1869, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, which is this lady, and Susan B. Anthony. How many of you have heard of Susan B. Anthony? What is she on that one of your parents may have at home? Something you may get at a bank. A coin. She's on a coin. Maybe I can find a coin and bring it one day and let y'all see it. Okay, so there is a coin with Susan B. Anthony on it.
Is she the one with the baby?
I don't know if she had a baby. But she's actually, you're going to be researching, and one of y'all actually have Susan B. Anthony, so maybe y'all can use that. Right? Okay, so both of these ladies, they organized the National Women's Suffrage Association to fight for women's rights. Does anybody know what suffrage is?
When you get down here.
No, not like suffer. Suffrage is the right to vote. So at this time, could women vote?
No, men had to vote.
Men were the only ones that could vote, and it was white men especially, right? The African American men couldn't vote yet. They got that later on. Okay. So the National Women's Suffrage Association was fighting for women's right to vote.
Picture adds meaning to the story by showing.
So more than a century later, so a century later from 1869 would have been 1969. It was like in the 1970s, I believe. There was a coin by the U.S. Mint that had Susan B. Anthony's face on it. Okay, in the 1920s, after 72 years of struggle, women win the right to vote with the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And shortly afterwards, the League of Women Voters is formed to push for more reform. So they're wanting to get women more rights. Right?
But now we don't have to do that.
No, but some people still don't have all rights.
True.
There's still some people out there that are trying to get rights. In 1942, about 350,000 women served in the armed forces during World War II. Many more provided support services like nurses and things like that. About 100,000 of those women served in the U.S. Navy as WAVES, which stands for Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service. So that means they help the Navy, probably when they got hurt or if they needed food or things like that, right? They're kind of helping them out, keeping them safe, keeping them fed. Yes?
I remember seeing these kind of things in the book, in the World War I, World War II.
Okay, so you've read a book that had some of this in it.
I was trying to get one in the library yesterday myself.
Okay. Okay, how many of y'all remember who she was from one of y'all's stories last week? Who is that?
Gertrude.
Is that Gertrude? Amelia Earhart. It was in one of y'all's level greeters. I can't remember exactly which one. It was Ella's group, yeah. So 1932, Amelia Earhart became the first woman to fly alone across the Atlantic Ocean, setting a new record of 14 hours and 56 minutes. Who else did y'all learn about last week? What did she do?
She beat the man's record by 2 whole hours, and it took her 14 hours and 31 seconds.
31 minutes.
31 minutes.
Okay, so she beat the man's record by 2 hours doing what?
Swimming the channel.
What did she swim across?
The English Channel.
The English Channel. Okay, in 1968, this is Shirley Chisholm. She was the first African-American woman elected to Congress. And 4 years later, she actually became the first black person to run for president in the Democratic primaries.
Did she win?
Did she win? Think about it. Did we have our first woman president? We haven't had our first woman president yet, have we?
No.
We haven't had our first woman president.
All our presidents have been men.
And our first black president, African-American president, is who? Barack Obama, our president right now.
Miss Shirley,
Yes.
you skipped a sentence. It says 4 years after.
Yeah, she was from where?
New York.
New York. Okay, in 1972, Congress passed the Equal Rights Amendment. And that was 49 years after it was introduced to Congress, so it took them almost 50 years to decide on this. It took them a really long time, didn't it? This amendment led to the equal rights for both men and women. But a constitutional amendment, which changes that amendment, that's what amendment is, it's a change to a law. It required both Congress and the state's approval. So both Congress and, like, for instance, the state of Alabama, both had to agree on it for it to be law in Alabama. But it later failed because not all the states wanted to approve it. They didn't want to agree with it. And then in 1972, Title IX came around, okay? That helped. It helps us in the classroom, but it also helped with male and female sports in schools. Women and girls were able to play more sports. Because back in that time, not every girl got to play sports that wanted to. Okay. So many female Olympic athletes said that Title IX gave them the opportunity to attend college, play sports, and they also had the opportunity to get athletic scholarships to college. So back in this time, it was mainly boys that got athletic scholarships to college.
And football.
Now this lady, she's actually still alive. This is Sandra Day O'Connor. She was the first woman that was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. She was the first woman judge. Do y'all know what the Supreme Court is?
Yeah.
It's the highest court in
The world.
in the United States.
She's
Okay.
still alive.
She is still alive, yes.
She is
still
still
a
alive.
I'm not sure. And no, she's retired from judge. She just stays at home now, I guess. I'm not sure.
Housewife.
But at this time, when she was a Supreme Court judge, only 6% of all the federal judges, federal means like the United States judges, were women. So only 6%. Is that a lot? No. And then in 1983, do y'all know who this lady is?
She's the
That's
first woman
right.
who went to outer space.
She was the first one, the
Woman to
first
ever go-
female. Shh. Tyron, don't fall off. The first female astronaut in space. She spent 6 days up there. She was the first woman to spend 6 days up there. First one ever up there. And today, there's about 25% of NASA's astronauts are women. Yes, Ella.
Is she still alive?
She died a few years ago, I want to say. That's what it told me. Okay, now this year there's a theme every year for National Women's History Month. This year it is celebrating women of character, courage, and commitment. So do you think some of the women y'all talked about last week would fall into this category?
Yes.
Who? Gertrude Ederle. Why, Ella? Why Gertrude Ederle?
Because she's from the English Channel. She's confident.
Yeah.
She,
So she never gave up, and she had the courage, right, to swim across the English Channel. Even when it got rough, when it got hard, when she was tired, cold, hungry, she kept going. She kept pushing on, right?
and she was very modest.
And she was very modest. That's right.
And it
Important.
says,
What leads you to believe that he is sad?
Now, some interesting facts I came across last night, too.
Factoids?
Interesting factoids, yes.
What does that mean?
Interesting facts. Okay. So, first one I came across is 61 million females lived in the United States as of this past December 2013. 61 million females. There are only, it's 161 million, I think. Yeah, 161 million females lived in the U.S. as of December 2013, which was this past Christmas. There was only 156.1 million males. So who has more, women or men?
Women.
Women. There's a lot more women in the United States, right? Then, at 85 years and older, there are 2 women to every 1 man living in the U.S. in 2012. Okay, so that means there are more men or women after they're 85? Women. Because 2 to 1, 2 women to 1 man,
there ain't gonna be no change.
there's more women, right? Then there were 74.8 million females 16 and older who worked in 2012. Okay, and 41.6% of those were actually like managers in professional occupations like doctors, lawyers, stuff like that, compared to 34.7% of employed males in the same year that were managers, doctors, lawyers. So there was a lot more women than men, right?
There's lots more women than men.
In this, yes. There were 1.6 million female veterans. What's a veteran?
A veterinarian.
No.
Someone who was in
Hold
war.
on, Dalton's talking. Dalton, what were you going to say?
Someone who was in war but retired.
Yeah, someone who was in the war and they retired from the war. They came back and what is it going back? So, there were 1.6 million female veterans in 2012. So that's a lot, yes, her.
I thought veterans was veterinarian.
No, veterans are soldiers that retired. Okay, there were 11.3 million female college students in the fall of 2012. So that was the beginning of y'all's second grade year. Yeah, the beginning of y'all's second grade year, there were 11.3 million female students in college. That's a lot, isn't it? And that's 56.8% of all the college students. So are there more girls or boys in college?
Boys.
Girls, look. That's 56.8 of all college students are female. If it's over 50, that's higher, right? Because the male would be like 43.2, I believe. So which one's greater? The girls. That's right. And then, as of 2012, 31.4% of women 25 and older, so my age and older, earned their bachelor's degree or more. Okay.
So you're on your way to earn your bachelor's?
I am on my way to earn my master's. A bachelor's degree is the first degree you get when you go through college. If you go 4 years.
You already have it.
And I already have that. That's right. Put it on. And then the last fact I have for y'all. There were an estimated 85.4 million mothers in the U.S. in 2009.
Whoa.
That's a lot of mothers, isn't it?
Gosh.
Okay, now, I'm going to read y'all a book. And I saw this book while I was at work a couple weeks ago. Found it interesting, so I thought I'd buy it and share it with you. It's called Founding Mothers, The Women Who Raised Our Nation by Cokie Roberts. Now, as I read this, I want you to think about why these women aren't always recognized in our history books. Why do you think the men get all the credit, I guess you could say? Why do they get every... I want you to think about it while we're reading, okay?